My name is Yvette, and I'm 34 years old. I stood in front of the mirror that Thanksgiving morning adjusting my dress for the 10th time, knowing it wouldn't matter. My daughter Emma, just 12, sat quietly on my bed watching me with those perceptive eyes that seemed to understand far more than any child should. I had no idea that in just a few hours she would speak words that would change everything. Before I share what happened that night, let me know where you're joining from. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please like and subscribe, because this story might resonate with you. Looking back now, I wonder how I didn't see the warning signs earlier. Marcus and I met during our sophomore year at Northwestern University. He was the star of the basketball team, tall, confident, with a smile that could light up an entire room. I was there on an academic scholarship studying library science, spending most of my time buried in books rather than at parties. We met at the campus library where I worked part-time. He'd come in looking for help with his economics paper, and somehow we ended up talking until the library closed. Our courtship was like something out of a movie. Marcus pursued me with the same determination he showed on the basketball court. Flowers appeared at my dorm room every Friday. He'd walk across campus just to carry my books. When he met my parents for the first time, my mother, a night shift nurse at the local hospital, was charmed by his manners. My father, an electrician who'd worked his hands raw to put me through school, appreciated how Marcus looked him in the eye when they shook hands. The wedding came 2 years after graduation. Marcus had landed a job at a prestigious investment firm in Chicago, and his family insisted on paying for everything. I should have recognized the first red flag when his mother Patricia suggested we hold the reception at their country club instead of the church hall my parents had offered. She said it with such sweetness, touching my hand gently, explaining how it would be more convenient for their friends who were flying in from both coasts. Patricia was a successful cardiologist who'd built her practice from scratch. Marcus's father, Robert, was a senior partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. His younger sister, Jennifer, was following in their father's footsteps, already making waves as a junior associate. Then there was his older brother, David, who'd married Natalie, a former Miss Illinois turned successful real estate agent. Every family gathering felt like a showcase of achievements, and I was always the one who seemed to fade into the wallpaper. The changes in Marcus were so gradual that I almost didn't notice them happening. During our first year of marriage, he was still the attentive man who'd won my heart. He'd come home from work eager to hear about my day at the public library, where I'd found a position. He'd laugh at my stories about peculiar patrons and celebrate with me when I successfully organized community reading programs. But after Emma was born, something shifted. The first comment came when Emma was just 6 months old. I was exhausted from night feeding, still carrying baby weight, sitting at his parents' dinner table, when Marcus casually mentioned that Natalie had managed to get back to her pre-pregnancy size just 3 weeks after having their son. It was said with a laugh, as if it were a harmless observation, but I felt the sting. By the time Emma turned 3, these comments had become more frequent. Marcus had been promoted to senior analyst, and suddenly he was attending more corporate events, meeting the wives of CEOs and CFOs. He'd come home and casually mention how put together they looked, how they managed to balance careers and motherhood while looking like they'd stepped out of fashion magazines. The promotion to CFO when Emma was 8 marked the real turning point. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just comparing me to others. He was actively expressing disappointment. Why was I still working at the library when I could be doing something more prestigious? Why didn't I join the tennis club like the other executives' wives? Why did I insist on shopping at Target when we could afford Nordstrom? His family reinforced these criticisms in their own subtle ways. Patricia would gift me expensive clothes for Christmas, always a size too small, with comments about how they'd look lovely once I got back in shape. Jennifer would talk endlessly about her cases, her billable hours, her partnership track, then turn to me with feigned interest to ask about story time at the library. Robert rarely acknowledged my presence at all, treating me like part of the furniture, unless he needed something passed at the dinner table. The family dinners became events I dreaded weeks in advance. I'd spend days preparing, trying to anticipate every possible criticism. I'd practice conversations in the mirror, prepare anecdotes that might make me sound more interesting, more worthy of being at their table. But nothing ever seemed enough. Marcus had developed a particular pattern at these gatherings. He'd start with small jabs disguised as jokes testing the water. If his family laughed, he'd escalate. By the end of the evening, I'd be the punchline to a dozen different stories, each one highlighting some perceived failure or inadequacy. The drive home would be silent. Marcus acting as if nothing had happened while I fought back tears, wondering how the man who once defended me against the world had become my biggest critic. The week before that fateful Thanksgiving, I threw myself into preparation with desperate determination. I discovered a recipe for croquembouche in a French pastry cookbook, an elaborate tower of cream puffs held together with caramel. It was ambitious, perhaps foolishly so, but I needed to prove something, if not to them, then to myself. I spent 3 evenings after Emma went to bed practicing the choux pastry, getting the consistency just right. My fingertips were burned from working with hot caramel, but I persevered. I watched YouTube tutorials on my phone while Emma did homework, memorizing techniques for achieving the perfect golden color, the ideal cream consistency. Marcus found me in the kitchen at midnight on Tuesday, surrounded by failed attempts. He looked at the mess, shook his head, and asked why I was trying so hard to impress people who already knew who I was. The cruelty was in how he said it, with pity, rather than encouragement, as if my efforts were pathetic rather than admirable. I also prepared my signature cornbread stuffing, the one dish Patricia had once admitted was better than her own. I made cranberry sauce from scratch, using the organic berries from the farmer's market, adding just a hint of orange zest the way my grandmother had taught me. Each dish was a small act of rebellion, a tiny insistence that I had value, that I brought something to their table besides being Marcus's disappointing wife. The dress selection took even longer. I must have tried on 20 different outfits, each one rejected for different reasons. Too casual would confirm their beliefs about my lack of sophistication. Too formal would seem like I was trying too hard. Too fitted would draw attention to the weight I'd gained. Too loose would look frumpy. Finally, I settled on a navy blue dress that hit just below the knee, professional, but not stuffy flattering, but not attention-seeking. Emma watched this entire production with quiet concern. She was mature for her 12 years, perhaps forced to grow up faster by witnessing the tension in our home. She offered to help with the dessert, her small hands carefully arranging cream puffs while I worked with the caramel. We worked in companionable silence, but I could feel her questions hovering in the air between us. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke at 5 to finish preparations. The dessert was assembled, covered carefully for transport. My hair was styled in loose waves that took an hour to look effortless. My makeup was subtle but precise, every line and shadow calculated to look natural while hiding the exhaustion in my eyes. Marcus emerged from the bedroom as I was packing the car, looking impeccable in his cashmere sweater and pressed khakis. He glanced at my dress and I held my breath, waiting. His eyes traveled from my feet to my face and he sighed. Not angry, not disappointed, just resigned, as if I was exactly what he expected, no more, no less. In the car, Emma sat in the back seat, unusually quiet. She'd chosen to wear the dress Patricia had given her for her birthday, a sophisticated outfit that made her look older than her years. I caught her eye in the rearview mirror and smiled, trying to convey reassurance I didn't feel. 20 minutes into the drive, Emma finally spoke. Her voice was careful, measured, as if she'd been rehearsing the words. She asked why Daddy always seemed unhappy with me, why nothing I did ever seemed good enough. The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus's jaw tightened, and he told her sharply that children shouldn't involve themselves in adult conversations. But Emma persisted with a courage I didn't know she possessed. She said she'd noticed how different he was at home versus at Grandma's house. How the jokes he made about me weren't funny, how they made everyone uncomfortable except for the people laughing. Marcus turned the radio up, effectively ending the conversation, but I saw Emma's face in the mirror set with a determination that looked eerily familiar. It was the same expression I'd worn 15 years ago when I decided to marry Marcus, despite my parents' gentle concerns. The last 10 minutes of the drive were suffocating. Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I knew he was composing the evening's first barb, probably something about Emma's inappropriate questions being a result of my inability to teach proper boundaries. I stared out the window at the familiar streets leading to his parents' estate, each turn bringing us closer to another evening of subtle humiliation. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I saw the other cars already there. David's Tesla, Jennifer's BMW, all symbols of the success that seemed to come so easily to the right family. Marcus parked and turned to Emma before we got out. His voice was low-controlled, but with an edge that made my stomach clench. He told her to behave herself, to remember that this was family, and family meant presenting a united front. Emma nodded, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. It wasn't fear or submission. It was something far more dangerous for Marcus. It was judgment. Patricia answered the door wearing a winter white pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her smile was practiced welcoming in a way that never reached her eyes. She kissed Marcus on both cheeks, then turned to me with that familiar up-and-down assessment. She complimented my dress, mentioning she'd seen something similar at Marshall's last week, the discount store reference sliding in like a perfectly placed knife. The house was immaculate, as always, decorated in what interior design magazines would call understated elegance. Every surface gleamed, every cushion was perfectly pluffed, every family photo strategically placed to showcase achievements. The smell of roasting turkey filled the air, mixed with Patricia's signature scent of Chanel No. 5. Jennifer was holding court in the living room, regaling Robert with details of her latest victory in court. She'd just won a multi-million-dollar settlement for a pharmaceutical company, protecting them from what she called frivolous lawsuits from people claiming side effects. She was wearing a burgundy dress that hugged her yoga-toned figure, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured. Her fiancé, another lawyer from her firm, sat beside her, nodding along, occasionally adding supportive comments. David and Natalie arrived moments after us, their 2 children perfectly dressed and behaved. Natalie looked like she'd just stepped out of a salon, her blonde hair in beachy waves, her makeup flawless, despite having 2 kids under 5. She immediately started talking about her latest sale, a $10 million property in Lincoln Park, while simultaneously managing to mention her morning Pilates class and the charity gala she was organizing. I placed my dessert on the kitchen counter, carefully removing the covering to reveal the croquembouche. For a moment there was silence, and I felt a small surge of pride. It looked professional, each cream puff perfectly golden, the caramel spun into delicate threads. Patricia examined it closely, then mentioned she'd seen something similar at the French bakery downtown, wondering aloud if that's where I'd gotten it. Before I could respond that I'd made it myself, Marcus laughed and said I'd been up all night working on it, making it sound obsessive rather than dedicated. Jennifer chimed in that she couldn't imagine having that much free time, while Natalie mentioned she just ordered desserts from a professional when needed, saying there was no shame in admitting what we weren't good at. The conversation moved to the dining room, where Patricia had outdone herself with the table setting. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and the china was the set that had been in Robert's family for generations. I was seated as always between the children's section and the main conversation, close enough to hear everything but positioned to make participation difficult. Emma sat across from me, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She was watching everything with those observant eyes, taking in the dynamics like she was studying for a test. Marcus's nephew asked her about school, and she responded politely but briefly, her attention never wavering from the adult conversation. The meal began with Robert's traditional toast, thanking everyone for their accomplishments this year. He mentioned Jennifer's partnership track, David's promotion to head of surgery, Natalie's real estate awards, Marcus's successful quarter at the firm. When he sat down without mentioning me or Emma, the omission rang louder than words. As plates were passed and wine was poured, Marcus began his performance. It started small, as it always did. He mentioned how I'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning last week, turning it into a story about how he'd had to wear the same suit twice to important meetings. Everyone chuckled politely, and I felt the familiar heat creeping up my neck. Emboldened, he moved on to how I'd mixed up the dates for Emma's parent-teacher conference, arriving a day late to find confused teachers. He painted a picture of incompetence that had everyone shaking their heads in amused sympathy. Patricia added that organization had never been my strong suit, remembering the time I'd supposedly mixed up the dates for their anniversary dinner 3 years ago. I wanted to correct them to mention that Marcus had given me the wrong date for the conference, that Patricia had changed the anniversary dinner plans without telling me, but I knew it would only make things worse. So I sat there cutting my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, forcing myself to smile as if I too found my failures amusing. The real escalation came with the main course. Marcus, now on his third glass of wine, started talking about our home life. He described my library job as a hobby rather than a career, joking that I spent more time reading the books than helping patrons. He mentioned how Emma had to remind me about school events, painting our daughter as the responsible one, while I was the scattered, unreliable mother. Jennifer laughed about how different we were, how Marcus needed someone more ambitious, more driven. Natalie suggested maybe I could take some online courses better myself, as if I was a project that needed fixing. Robert continued eating in silence, occasionally nodding at particularly cutting observations. The cruelest moment came when Marcus started comparing me to Natalie directly. He talked about how she managed to maintain her figure, her career, her social life, all while raising 2 children. He wondered aloud with fake concern what I did with my time, since I clearly wasn't doing any of those things successfully. He mentioned finding me asleep on the couch at 3 in the afternoon last week, leaving out that I'd been up all night with Emma when she had the flu. Patricia added that she'd never understood why I hadn't done more with my education, that a library science degree seemed like such a waste when I could have pursued something meaningful. She said it with pity, as if my choices were tragic rather than valid. Jennifer mentioned her friend who'd started with a similar degree, but had pivoted to law school, implying it wasn't too late if I really wanted to amount to something. I felt myself shrinking, with each word becoming smaller and smaller in my chair. My hands were trembling as I reached for my water glass, and I could see Emma watching me, her face flushed with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. It might have been embarrassment or anger or something more complex. The moment that changed everything came just as Patricia was serving my croquembouche, which she'd reluctantly admitted was quite good, though she mentioned the cream seemed a bit heavy. Marcus had just launched into another story, this one about how I'd cried during a company dinner because I felt out of place among the other executives' wives. He was describing my tears with theatrical detail, mimicking my voice when Emma's chair scraped against the floor. The sound was jarring in the middle of his performance, and everyone turned to look at her. She was standing, her hands flat on the table, her young face set with a determination that made her look years older. The room fell silent. Marcus paused mid-sentence, his mouth still open, looking at his daughter with confusion that quickly shifted to irritation. He started to tell her to sit down, that interrupting adults was rude, but Emma spoke first. Her voice was clear, steady, without a trace of the nervousness I expected. She looked directly at her father and said she had something to say, something everyone needed to hear. Marcus's face reddened, and he began to rise from his chair, but Robert surprisingly gestured for him to sit, apparently curious about what his granddaughter had to say. Emma took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her words were measured, deliberate, as if she'd been preparing this speech for years. She said she'd been keeping a journal since she was 8 years old, documenting things she observed, things that confused her, things that made her sad. She said she'd started it because her teacher had told her writing could help make sense of confusing feelings. The room was completely still. Even the children at the far end of the table had stopped fidgeting. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. She said she'd written down every time she'd heard her father make her mother cry, every cruel joke, every comparison, every moment of humiliation disguised as humor. She had dates, specific quotes, detailed observations written with the honest clarity that only a child could provide. She recited some of the entries from memory. October 15th, 2022. Dad told Mom she was lucky he didn't leave her for someone more interesting. March 3rd, 2023. Dad said Mom embarrassed him at the company picnic by wearing the wrong outfit. July 21st, 2023. Dad laughed when his colleague asked if Mom was the nanny because she looked so tired. With each date, each quote, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Patricia's face had gone from amused to uncomfortable. Jennifer was staring at her brother with something like shock. Natalie was looking at her plate, while David's jaw was clenched. Robert had put down his fork and was listening intently. But Emma wasn't finished. She turned to her grandmother and asked if she knew what it felt like to watch your mother pretend to be okay while dying inside. She asked Jennifer if she'd want her future children to think it was normal for men to treat women like punchlines. She asked her grandfather if this was the legacy he wanted, a family where cruelty was disguised as sophistication. Then she turned back to Marcus, and what she said next drained all color from his face. She said she knew about Ashley, his colleague, who he'd been texting late at night. She knew about the business trips that weren't really business trips. She'd seen the credit card statements he thought he'd hidden, the hotel charges, the expensive dinners for two in cities where he was supposed to be alone. She pulled out her phone, such a modern gesture from someone so young, and showed it to Patricia. She'd taken photos of the text messages she'd seen on Marcus's phone when he'd left it unlocked. Messages that were clearly not professional, that spoke of meetings that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or investment strategies. Emma's voice never wavered as she asked her father if this was what he wanted to teach her about marriage, about love, about how men should treat women. She asked if he wanted her to grow up thinking she should accept being diminished, mocked, betrayed, all while smiling and pretending everything was fine. She asked if he wanted her to marry someone exactly like him. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known him, he was completely speechless. His usual quick wit, his ready excuses, his charming deflections, all of it had abandoned him in the face of his 12-year-old daughter's truth-telling. Patricia was the first to speak, her voice shaky, asking to see the phone. Emma walked around the table and showed her grandmother the evidence she'd collected. Patricia's face went from pale to flushed as she scrolled through the messages. Her hands were shaking as she passed the phone to Robert, who reviewed the content with the same careful attention he'd give a legal document. Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper, how long this had been going on. Emma replied that based on what she'd seen, at least 18 months, though she suspected it was longer. She'd started paying attention when she noticed her mother crying more often, when the jokes at family dinners became crueler, when her father started coming home later and later. David stood up suddenly, his chair nearly tipping over. He looked at his younger brother with disgust and asked how he could do this, how he could stand there every week, humiliating his wife while carrying on an affair. Natalie put her hand on David's arm, but he shook it off, his anger building. Marcus finally found his voice, but it was weak, uncertain. He tried to say Emma didn't understand, that she was taking things out of context, that children didn't understand adult relationships. But Emma responded with a wisdom that belied her years, saying she understood perfectly. She understood that her father was a bully and a liar, that he'd made her mother feel worthless while betraying their family. She said she'd watched her mother shrink a little more each day, becoming quieter, smaller, less of the vibrant person she'd once been. She'd watched her mother prepare for these dinners like someone preparing for battle, trying so hard to be perfect, to be enough when nothing would ever be enough for someone who'd already decided she was less than. Robert set down the phone and looked at his son. His voice was controlled but cold as he asked if the messages were real. Marcus couldn't meet his father's eyes as he nodded, mumbling something about how things were complicated, how Yvette and he had grown apart, the classic excuses of every cheating spouse. Patricia stood up from the table, her composure finally cracking. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she was sorry that she hadn't known, that she should have seen what was happening. It was the first time in 15 years she'd ever apologized to me for anything, and the shock of it nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. The room erupted after Patricia's apology. Marcus tried to regain control, his voice rising as he told Emma to sit down, that she was grounded, that she had no right to go through his things. But Emma stood her ground, her young face set with determination. She said she'd rather be grounded forever than watch her mother disappear a little more each day. That's when I finally found my voice. I stood up, my legs shaky, but my resolve firm. For the first time in years, I didn't smooth things over, didn't try to diffuse the situation, didn't make excuses for anyone. I looked at Marcus and told him Emma was right. Every word she'd said was true. I told them about the years of subtle degradation, how each joke had chipped away at my confidence until I barely recognized myself. I described the anxiety that gripped me before every family dinner, the way I'd rehearse conversations trying to anticipate what might trigger the next round of humiliation. I talked about lying awake at night wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could change to be worthy of the man who'd once promised to cherish me. I revealed that I'd known about Ashley for months. I'd found the receipt for jewelry I'd never received, noticed the new cologne he only wore on his supposed business trips. I'd stayed silent because I'd convinced myself it was better than being alone, better than admitting failure, better than proving everyone right about my inadequacy. But hearing Emma speak, seeing her courage, I realized what I was teaching her by staying silent. I was showing her that women should accept whatever treatment they received, that keeping the peace was more important than keeping your dignity. I was teaching her to shrink herself to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying for weeks. Inside were divorce papers I'd had drawn up, but hadn't found the courage to use. I set them on Patricia's pristine tablecloth, right next to the untouched croquembouche I'd worked so hard to perfect. I told Marcus he could sign them now or receive them formally through my lawyer on Monday. The table exploded in reactions. Jennifer gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. David nodded approvingly, shooting his brother a look of disgust. Natalie was crying quietly, whether from shock or sympathy, I couldn't tell. Robert remained silent, but his jaw was clenched, his disappointment in his son evident. Marcus's facade finally crumbled completely. He started begging, saying we could work things out, that he'd end things with Ashley, that he'd go to counseling. He promised to change, to be better, to stop the jokes, the comparisons, the cruel observations. He even said he loved me, words I hadn't heard in years, but they rang hollow now, desperate rather than sincere. Emma walked over to stand beside me, taking my hand in hers. Her grip was firm, supportive, giving me strength I didn't know I needed. She looked at her father and said she would never forgive him if he hurt me again, that she'd lost respect for him, that he'd have to earn back her trust if that was even possible. Patricia surprised everyone by speaking up again. She told Marcus that his behavior was unconscionable, that she'd raised him better than this. She admitted she'd been complicit in making me feel unwelcome, that her own insecurities about her son, marrying beneath his social status, had made her cruel. She said she'd been wrong, that I'd been a good wife, a good mother, and deserved better than what this family had given me. Robert finally spoke, his lawyer's mind already working through the implications. He told Marcus he was disappointed that the firm's reputation could be damaged if this became public. He mentioned that infidelity would not look good in divorce proceedings, especially with Emma's documented evidence. His concern was more professional than personal, but it had the effect of making Marcus realize the full scope of his situation. Jennifer, finding her voice, admitted she'd suspected something was wrong but had chosen to ignore it. She said she'd seen Marcus with Ashley at a restaurant downtown, but had convinced herself it was business. She apologized to me for not speaking up, for participating in the jokes, for being part of the problem. She said she'd been so focused on proving herself in the family that she'd forgotten basic human decency. David was less forgiving. He told Marcus he was disgusted that he'd lost all respect for his brother. He said he'd always noticed how Marcus treated me, but had stayed quiet to keep the peace. He apologized to me for his silence, saying he should have stood up for me years ago. Natalie nodded in agreement, squeezing his hand supportively. The children at the end of the table were watching with wide eyes, understanding that something significant was happening, even if they didn't grasp all the details. Marcus's nephew asked if Uncle Marcus was in trouble, and David simply said yes, that sometimes adults make bad choices and have to face consequences. Marcus tried one more time to salvage the situation. He stood up, reaching for me, but I stepped back, Emma moving protectively closer. He said we couldn't throw away 15 years, that Emma needed both parents, that divorce would traumatize her. But Emma spoke up again, saying that watching her mother be degraded was more traumatic than any divorce could be. She told him that she'd rather have two happy parents apart than two miserable ones together. She said she'd learned that love wasn't supposed to hurt, that jokes were supposed to be funny for everyone, that marriage was supposed to be a partnership, not a performance where one person was always the punchline. Patricia stood up and walked over to me. She took my hands in hers, her eyes filled with tears and what looked like genuine remorse. She said she'd help with whatever I needed, that she'd support me through the divorce, that she'd make sure Marcus provided properly for Emma and me. It was a complete reversal of everything I'd expected, and I found myself crying for the first time that evening. Robert added that he'd recommend his best divorce attorney, someone outside the family firm, to avoid conflicts of interest. He said Marcus would be fair in the settlement, or he'd face consequences beyond just the divorce. The threat was subtle but clear, the power of the right family now working in my favor rather than against me. We left Patricia and Robert's house that night without Marcus. He tried to follow us to the car, still pleading, still making promises, but David physically blocked him, telling him to give us space. Emma and I drove away in my old Honda, leaving Marcus standing in the driveway of his parents' mansion, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I pulled over at a gas station 5 miles away, because my hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. Emma and I sat in the parked car, holding each other, both of us crying now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She kept apologizing for not telling me sooner about Ashley, about the messages, about what she'd observed. I told her she was the bravest person I knew, that she'd saved me when I couldn't save myself. We didn't go home that night. Instead, we checked into a small hotel near the airport, needing space from the house that held too many painful memories. Emma called in our pizza order while I ran a hot bath, and we ate cross-legged on the hotel bed, watching old sitcom reruns, pretending for a few hours that we were on an adventure rather than escaping a life that had become unbearable. The next morning, my phone had 37 missed calls from Marcus and dozens of text messages ranging from anger to desperation to self-pity. I deleted them all without reading them fully. Patricia had also called, leaving a voicemail that she understood if I needed space, but wanted me to know her offer of help was genuine. Jennifer had texted a simple message of support with her personal phone number if I needed legal advice. Over the next few days, Emma and I established a new routine. We went to the house while Marcus was at work packing our essential belongings. Emma was methodical, making lists, labeling boxes, showing an organizational skill that reminded me of myself before years of criticism had made me second-guess every decision. We found a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood closer to Emma's school and my work. It was smaller than our house, but it felt bigger somehow, filled with possibility rather than dread. Emma chose paint colors for her room, a soft sage green that she said felt peaceful. We bought furniture from secondhand stores, each piece chosen because we liked it, not because it would impress anyone. Marcus tried various tactics to get us to come back. He sent flowers to my work until I asked security to refuse deliveries. He showed up at Emma's school, but she told the principal she didn't want to see him outside of agreed visitation. He even had his mother call, though Patricia was respectful, only passing along his message that he wanted to try counseling. The divorce proceedings moved forward quickly. True to his word, Robert had recommended an excellent attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces. Marcus, perhaps understanding that fighting would only make things worse, agreed to generous terms. The house would be sold, proceeds split equally. He'd pay substantial alimony and child support. Emma would have a college fund that he couldn't touch. The most surprising support came from unexpected places. My supervisor at the library, who I'd thought barely noticed me, offered me a full-time position with benefits when she heard about my situation. The other librarians rallied around me, creating a schedule that allowed me to handle lawyer appointments and Emma's needs. They told me they'd been worried about me for years, but hadn't known how to help. Emma's school counselor reached out, offering resources for children dealing with divorce. Emma attended a support group for teens where she met others going through similar situations. She came home from the first meeting looking lighter, saying it helped to know she wasn't alone, that other kids had parents who'd forgotten how to be kind to each other. 3 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, we had our first court date. Marcus looked different older somehow, the confidence that had once attracted me replaced by something hollow. He tried to approach me before the hearing, but my lawyer intervened. Emma had chosen not to attend spending the day with my parents instead, who'd driven up from Indiana to support us. The judge reviewed the settlement, asking if both parties agreed to the terms. When it was my turn to speak, my voice was clear and strong. I said yes, I agreed, and I felt the word carry weight beyond just the legal proceedings. I was agreeing to a new life, to freedom, to showing Emma that we deserved better. After the hearing, Patricia approached me outside the courthouse. She was alone, Robert having stayed away to maintain neutrality. She handed me a check saying it was for Emma's extracurriculars, whatever she wanted to pursue. When I tried to refuse, she insisted, saying it was the least she could do after years of making me feel unwelcome in the family. She also gave me a letter she'd written, but hadn't sent, dated 3 years earlier. In it, she'd expressed concerns about Marcus's treatment of me to Robert, who dismissed them as marital adjustment. She said she'd been a coward for not pursuing it, for choosing family harmony over doing what was right. The letter was her confession and her apology, more honest than anything she'd ever said to me in person. A year has passed since that Thanksgiving dinner, and life looks completely different now. Emma and I have settled into our apartment, which we filled with books, plants, and photographs of actual happy memories, not staged family portraits. The walls are covered with Emma's awards from Debate Club, her latest passion, where she's learning to use her voice in powerful ways. I was promoted to head librarian at the branch library, a position that came with a significant raise and the authority to implement new programs. I started a support group for women going through divorce, meeting weekly in the library's community room. The first meeting had 3 attendees. Now we regularly have 15 to 20 women sharing stories, resources, and strength. Emma sees Marcus every other weekend, an arrangement she requested to maintain boundaries while still having a relationship with her father. He's different with her now, more careful, more respectful. She says he's going to therapy individually and with her occasionally. She's not ready to forgive him completely, but she's open to the possibility of rebuilding their relationship on new terms. The extended right family dynamics have shifted significantly. Jennifer reached out several months ago asking if we could have coffee. She admitted she'd been threatened by me in the beginning, that my contentment with a simple life had made her question her own relentless pursuit of success. We meet monthly now, and she's become an unexpected friend, someone who understands the pressure of trying to belong in that family. David and Natalie invited us to their son's birthday party last month. It was the first right family event we'd attended since the divorce. Marcus was there, keeping his distance but civil. When their son asked why Uncle Marcus and Aunt Yvette didn't live together anymore, David simply said that sometimes people are happier apart, and that was okay. Patricia has undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. She volunteers at the library now, reading to children during story time. She's awkward with me still, our interactions careful and overly polite, but she's trying. She told me once that losing her relationship with Emma during those first months after the divorce made her realize what she'd prioritized and what she'd lost. Robert remains distant but respectful. He sends birthday cards to Emma with generous checks, and he attended her debate competition when she made it to state finals. He told her afterward that she reminded him of his mother, a woman who'd stood up to his father during a time when divorce was scandalous. It was the first time I'd heard him speak of family history with anything other than pride in their success. My parents have been wonderful, driving up once a month to spend weekends with us. My mother told me she's proud of me for finally standing up for myself, that she'd wanted to intervene for years but knew I had to find my own strength. My father fixed everything in our apartment that needed repair, whistling while he worked, saying it was nice to see me smile again. The most significant change has been in my relationship with myself. I enrolled in online courses to get my master's degree in library science, something I'd always wanted but Marcus had deemed unnecessary. I joined a hiking group that meets Saturday mornings, rediscovering my love of nature that years of trying to fit into country club culture had suppressed. I started writing again, journaling at first, then short stories, finding my voice word by word. There's even been romance, though I'm taking it slowly. His name is James, a single father who brings his daughter to the library's weekend programs. He's kind in an uncomplicated way, laughs at my jokes, instead of making me the joke, and treats Emma with respect and genuine interest. Emma approves cautiously, saying, "He seems nice," but warning me to pay attention to actions, not just words. Last week, Emma won her school's debate championship with a speech about the importance of speaking truth to power, even when that power is your own family. The auditorium was packed, and I saw Marcus in the back row, tears in his eyes as she spoke about courage, dignity, and the strength to walk away from situations that diminish you. After the competition, as we celebrated with ice cream, Emma told me she was proud of me. She said watching me rebuild our life had taught her more than any lecture about resilience could. She said she'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you deserve better and take steps to claim it. The croquembouche I'd made that Thanksgiving never got eaten. Patricia had saved it, freezing it in what I suspect was a moment of sentimentality. She showed it to me recently, still in her freezer, saying she kept it as a reminder of the night everything changed. I told her to throw it away, that we didn't need monuments to our pain. But I did keep one thing from that night: the divorce papers I'd carried in my purse for weeks before finding the courage to use them. They're framed now, not the actual documents, but a photocopy hanging in my bedroom where only I can see them. They remind me that I had the strength all along. I just needed my 12-year-old daughter to show me where to find it. Sometimes the most powerful truths come from the smallest voices in the room. Emma's courage that Thanksgiving night broke 15 years of silence, shattered the facade of a perfect family, and gave us both the chance to rebuild our lives with authenticity and dignity. She saved me by refusing to let me disappear, by demanding better for both of us. I think about that night often, how it could have gone differently if Emma had stayed silent, if she'd absorbed the lesson that women should accept whatever treatment they receive. Instead, she chose to speak, to risk everything for truth. And in doing so, she taught me that love should never require you to make yourself smaller. We're healing, Emma and I, day by day, building a life where jokes are actually funny, where achievements are celebrated regardless of their scale, where worthiness isn't measured by someone else's standards. It's a smaller life in some ways, without the big house and country club membership, but it's ours, and it's honest, and that makes it infinitely more valuable. Looking back at that woman in the mirror on Thanksgiving morning, adjusting her dress for the 10th time, I want to tell her it's going to be okay. That the next few hours will be horrible but necessary. That her daughter will save her in ways she never expected. That sometimes families break so they can heal properly. That speaking truth, even when your voice shakes, even when it destroys everything you've built, is the only way to build something real. The last thing I'll share is what Emma wrote in her journal the night after that Thanksgiving dinner. She showed it to me recently, a simple entry that captures everything. It said that heroes don't always wear capes or carry swords. Sometimes they wear navy blue dresses and carry divorce papers in their purses. Sometimes they're 12 years old, with too much wisdom for their age. And sometimes the biggest victory is simply choosing to stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Have you ever had someone younger than you teach you a profound life lesson? What truths have children in your life revealed that adults were too polite or scared to voice? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places and the courage to reclaim your worth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, it's never too late to stop accepting less than you deserve. May you find your voice, your strength, and people in your life who celebrate rather than diminish your light.